Namaste.
Namaste, and welcome to our conversation on Hindus, Hinduism, and Hindutva. I'm Vandana Jain. I'm an Indian American. I live and work in the US with my two grown up kids, my husband, and my father. Today, I have the immense pleasure of talking to Sankrant Sanuji. Sankrantji is an author, entrepreneur, and public intellectual who is the founder and CEO of the publishing house Garuda Prakashan. He spent 9 years at Microsoft Corporation in various engineering and management roles, then left his IT career to focus on personal growth in the yoga traditions and working towards a plural, sustainable world. He is an advocate for indigenous cultures and languages with his book titled The English Medium Myth Dismantling Barriers to India's Growth. Sankrantji is a graduate of IIT Kanpur and the University of Texas at Austin and holds 6 technology patents. He is also faculty at the Art of Living Foundation. Welcome, Sankrantji.
Thank you, Vandana ji. Namaste.
Namaste. So, first of all, I really want to congratulate you for the amazing work that Garuda has been doing. I mean, it's just phenomenal the kind of platform Garuda has provided to indigenous authors, writers, and our stories, which otherwise would not have received this kind of exposure. So many congratulations to you on that.
Thank you so much, Vandana ji. And this is so, one of the reasons that led to my starting Garuda was that a civilization that fails to tell its stories in its own way, in its own words, in its own sensibility, is one that will not exist anymore. And we have been a storytelling civilization. We have told stories for ages, and we have told all kinds of stories which have immense truth and wisdom and humor and rasa as part of the story. So the story has been a very, very important vehicle for the transmission of our culture, and that's why we needed just one more vahana, a contemporary vahana. So Garuda was formed.
So much needed, much needed. Also, tell me, how are you doing? Recently you've been through a bit of a harrowing experience when you were back in India at the time when the Delta variant was at its peak, at its worst. So you also were hospitalized due to COVID, correct?
Yes. I got into the deep end of it actually. It was right when, if you see the graph, there is this time when this whole Delta variant COVID wave hits India, and it's crazy. It happens around April 10th, 12th. And exactly on April 12th is when I got positive diagnosis for COVID. And for the first 10 days or so, I was like, I can manage this, I'll handle this. I was taking some allopathic, some Ayurveda, some combination, and then my oxygen level drops completely, and then my sister is scrambling to find a hospital bed, and luckily she was able to find one. So I spent some time in the hospital, and it took, even after recovering, it took maybe a couple of months before I was really feeling that I'm back to my physical activities and so on and so forth. So it was a journey, but Jai Ram ki ichha. If in fact, I first when I just came out of it, and this was my feeling all along, that if some work needs to be done from me, then Prabhu will keep me, and if it's time for me to go, then he'll call me. It's all good.
Well, I'm sure we are all very, very glad that you're doing well and you're healthy and you're recovering fine.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And in fact, I do credit a lot of the blessings and wishes from so many from so many people and well wishers. That was definitely instrumental in my recovery as well. So thanks to you, and thanks to everybody.
Absolutely. So, Sankrantji, in 2002, you wrote an article where you analyzed Microsoft and Carta Encyclopedia's difference in approach in how they covered Hinduism as opposed to how they covered Christianity and Islam. And at that time, Encyclopedia Encarta was widely used as a reference source in American schools. So as a result of your article, in fact, Encyclopedia Encarta, in their future editions, removed their article on Hinduism, their very biased article on Hinduism, and replaced it with a much more accurate one. So today, where are we with regards to how Hinduism and Hindutva are handled in the discourse about cultures, identities, and religions in the US?
Well, I think in a way, the America in particular and the West in general have a very schizophrenic uh, approach towards Hindu traditions. On the one hand, there is a very high degree of acceptance. And in fact, there was a few years ago, there was a Newsweek article, uh, I think that led with saying we are all Hindus now. That was the title, and what the article was pointing out is that millions and millions of America are now chanting Om. They're doing yoga, and many of them believe in in Punarjanam, in rebirth, and many believe in plural paths. That there is not one exclusive franchise that some religion has, and if you don't believe in X, you're going to hell. If you don't believe in Y, you're going to hell. So the article was pointing out that the values and the ideas of the Hindu tradition are really permeating American society. And so there is this part of it, and I see this every day. I see, as part of being a yoga teacher, being an art of living teacher, how receptive people are in the US. In fact, there's an interesting story even within Carta, because I was working with the editor of Encarta to get the new article written on Hindu traditions at that time. And the old article, it was so obvious, people can go to my website and look at the critique of it. It was so obvious that the reason I even got into it, I mean, I had really, I wasn't really very much into this at all. I actually got into it as a result of reading the Encarta entry. This was when my daughter was going to school. And just out of curiosity, I checked what the Encarta article on Hinduism was about. And I was just shocked. I was appalled. It had nothing, it had no relationship to what I grew up with understanding Hindu tradition or what my lived experience was. It was about, blood rituals and aghoris eating flesh. And that was the thrust of the article, which is, for 99% of Hindus, it's completely unrecognizable. But that article was coming from the academy. That article was coming from Wendy Doniger, who wrote it, who was really who's been the queen of the American Academy in terms of Hinduism studies. I think Rajiv called a whole bunch of scholar Wendy's children, people who graduated. So the schizophrenia comes from, on the one hand, there is a large mainstream acceptance and even hunger for the traditions. You have something like Eat, Pray, and Love that becomes such a big movie, and in fact, Julia Roberts said that she is a Hindu, and of course, Eat, Pray, Love, that was about somebody's journey into the ashram, and so many Americans are actually going into the ashram, learning yoga, learning doing kirtan. Kirtan is such a big movement that is happening. You have people like Krishna Das, so many people around us. So there is that, and then there is the academia, and it's very interesting, the seeding of this part of the influence of Hindu tradition in the lived form, in the experienced form, has done by our sages and gurus and enlightened swamis who came to the West, and who just they came. Somebody like Swami Prabhupada came with not a penny. They came with nothing except and there was no church backing them. There was not billions of dollars put on evangelism. There was nothing. It was just one person and their conviction and their clarity and their devotion that attracted thousands and thousands and millions of people. So a lot of the influence and a lot of the things that happened in America, this is the counterculture revolution that was happening. And again, all this was part of the left really at that point, which is, Woodstock happens, counterculture revolution happens, the Beatles become Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's disciples, TM takes off in a big way. So vegetarianism, environmentalism, all of this actually comes, a lot of this has come from Hindu influence and Hindu gurus influencing American society,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there is that. And then the other side is academia. And if you look at the parampara of academia, the parampara of academia is rooted in colonialism and the church. So if you look at even the universities that are set up, whether in the West or whether they were set up in India, even the scholars that were trained in Indian academia who came to the West, are the universities, the older universities and institutions were destroyed. These were all institutions that were set up by the British.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the institutions that are producing and continue to produce sort of this very negative and also literally garbage. I mean, it's not reflecting any deep understanding, because unless you have done sadhana, unless you're really immersed in the tradition, you really don't understand what it's talking about. So you can manufacture all kinds of stories about it, but none of it is actually scholarship. So a lot of the academic writing, unfortunately, is stemming from the colonial parampara, even if then they call themselves that they are being they're post-colonials or what have you.
Right.
But you can't be post-colonial and be in the academy in some sense, because where is the alternate ground? You cannot keep building on that same structure. The foundation still remains the Western view of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
which comes from, has a long history in the church, and then the challenge to the church. So unless you really say, okay, what is the new ground that you are building on, you can't really do the challenge. So this is really where the two sides come.
The two styles come from. So I often wonder, like, why is the academia so negative?
Hmm.
I understand that you're saying it's based in colonial parampara.
Right.
Even even till today, why has it not been able to shake that off? And why is it still so deeply rooted in it?
I think one of the problems that has happened in the American academy, unlike in other cases, and this is true, for instance, even in Buddhist studies or Islamic studies, or many other disciplines that are being studied, that the people who are in the academy are well versed to represent themselves. So more and more in the academy, you will have Muslim scholars that are talking about the Islamic tradition. You will have Christian scholars. Of course, there's a whole lot of history of Christian seminary work and Christian theological schools and so on, so on, that are representing. I mean, there can be critiques of it, but you at least have a home team which
Mm-hmm.
is coming from that tradition.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the if you look at the in the case of Hindu studies, and of course in the case of Buddhist studies, the Dalai Lama seeded a number of people who were sadhak scholars. They were people who had practiced the tradition, who had
Mm-hmm.
done the meditations, who
Mm-hmm.
had an internal understanding of what it stands for.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in the Buddhist studies, you'll find that there's much more balance.
Mm-hmm.
But in Hindu studies, what happened is that the the people who came from India, who were supposedly the ones who could represent,
Mm-hmm.
actually came from this entire communist Marxist epistemology and training that
Mm-hmm.
happened in Indian academia. So in some senses, if those people were out here and saying, no, you are misrepresenting our tradition, where there are people in the in the American academy that would take that seriously. But unfortunately, rather than being a corrective, the people who are Indians in so-called South Asian studies and so on and so forth are often even worse, because they have really internalized this whole narrative of, you have to save India from Hindus and from Hinduism, and to remove that because it's oppressive and misogynistic and all this whole narrative that begins from colonial narratives, that begins from evangelical narratives, have unfortunately been internalized in the way the Indian scholars also represent in the academy, at least the ones that are in the US academy.
I see. So, in your article, Dead Peoples Tell No Tales, you've discussed, and I paraphrase, how both the left and the right of American scholarship created their separate demonization of Native Americans. The left branch of Western academia moved on to the scientific racism with theories of ideas of progress and state of savagery in the history of mankind. And they extended the theories of evolution to classifying primitive peoples in the 19th century anthropology. So from the right, the picture was obvious. God had given true religion to his people, and everybody else was in the clutch of Satan. So the imagery is still alive, but it has changed its form. It has become, God. So it's perhaps become more subtle, and it's not so obvious. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, if you look at it, the people, we kind of look at the politics in the US, for instance, and there is this binary, and there's the left and the right, and they are at loggerheads with each other. So all that is going on as one dynamic. But if you look at it in a bigger picture, there is. In fact, I think I was reading Tom Holland or somebody's tweet just now, which is how the left actually replicates structures of Christianity.
Mm.
So it's still looking, it looks for the new Messiah, it looks for the new victims that have to be, that will inherit the earth. So that whole sort of discourse of Christianity keeps replicating itself, even when we talk of the left, even though the overt religious symbolism is gone, but the structurally it remains the same. Structurally it doesn't change very much. So, but if you look at, a whole host of scholarship that emanates from 19th century from academia, is, from Hegel to even, Darwin talks about, how certain races are going to be, are going to the natural supremacy, or they're going to survive versus others. And
Mhm.
so this whole discourse post Darwin, in fact, these are the people who are writing against the church, and Darwinian theory is challenging the church. But they have also, so that in that sense they're the left versus the church, which is the right. But they have also taken on this notion of European supremacy, and that the white race is superior to other races, and they are the natural leaders. And Marx himself talks about the despotic orient and unchanging, and so on and so forth. So all of those stereotypes are very much present in the left side, and they're very much present in the academic discourse. And I would say the racial theories that academia creates certainly play a big part in the Holocaust later on. So academia is responsible. Western academia has been responsible for genocide, and it continues to do so. When we see the kind of demonization of Hindus under the garb of Hindutva, that happens. It's the same pattern. They have done this many times before.
Mm. So it's interesting you say in Dead Peoples Tell No Tales that until people are, the only Indian, a good Indian is a dead Indian,
Hmm.
right? So that one has to be the culture. Once the culture is not a threat any longer,
Right.
then
Right.
suddenly the discourse becomes more positive, more sympathetic towards the
Right.
culture, talking about the noble savage and stuff like that, right?
Right.
We
Right.
find those we Hindus, Hinduism and Hindutva haven't reached that stage as yet.
Yes. Yes. So if you look at the shift in the discourse about Native Americans, you find that up until the late 19th century they are constantly being demonized, and they are called savages, and that's where the quote comes from. A good Indian is a dead Indian, or a good Indian is a dead Indian. Is so that's how this is the period of conquest that's happening in the 18th and 19th centuries. And once they're more or less conquered, more or less colonized, wounded knee happens, massacres happen. So they're no longer a threat, and then the academia starts saying, oh, they were noble people. Now, first it gives the material for the genocide, and then once the genocide happens, they're like, oh, look, we are so liberal, we can talk about them as noble people. All right. So it's like, and this has been the story over and over again of how academia in the West has created these. And of course, now they're if you look at this conference that is happening, they're uh, using Indians as the main people in who are doing the firing, brown people as the main people doing the firing, and this also has a long history in colonialism and how the East India Company used Indian sepoys largely to fire on Indians. So this is not new. It is a pattern we've seen repeated over and over again.
And that's where the Wendy's children come into the picture, right? That
Yeah,
they.
Wendy's children. I mean, Wendy's children is of course American academics who are in the Western academia who come from the West, and also Wendy's children does have some Indian counterparts. But then there's a whole host of people from India that have been brought up with this very toxic kind of far left ideology, who believe that really Hinduism needs to be wiped out, and India has to be saved from Hindu, or in fact India doesn't even exist. It's an artificial entity. This is where this whole South Asianism comes from. The South Asian term was largely invented to not have to use India to deny that such a thing as India even exists, and so on and so forth.
So let's talk about the terms Hindu, Hinduism, and Hindutva. When
Hmm.
did they come about? Can we talk a little bit about their history?
Yeah, sure. I think something really interesting. I wonder if I can share this. Yeah, let me try to share. I use this tool called Google Engrams, which is, they've scanned a whole lot of books. Of course, it doesn't have everything,
Mhm.
but it has this. One second, let me see if I can show it to the users here. Um, So it actually has, so off the scan books, you can do a term search. So
Mhm.
here I did a case insensitive search on Hindus, Hinduism, and Hindutva. And what you find is that um, you see that as a term, we are not talking about, we have all these academics that keep saying, oh, Savarkar invented, and then they link it to RSS and something. So they have all these theories, but a lot of these theories are not based on real data. Mm.
Mhm.
And if you look at the data,
Mhm.
Hindutva really starts taking off as a term in the
Mhm.
in almost the late 1980s and early 1990s.
Mhm.
um, and it's practically not even in usage before that, at least in the corpus that Google is scanning here.
Mhm.
um, and Hindus, of course, is an old term, and then Hinduism is a term that, if you see, has been, it really emerges if you look here in the early part of the 19th century. So so this itself is a very interesting picture about the historicity of these terms themselves. And one of the things that you see is that Hindu is actually somewhat of a native term. So
Mhm.
Hindu is a term. In fact, we've been told, or the story goes, that Hindu is a term that came about because the Persians couldn't say her, so they made it Sindhu. I mean, they couldn't say sir, so they made it from Sindhu. It became Hindu, and so on and so forth. And some of that might be true, but there's actually ancient references to Hindusthanam that I have found, and I'll be covering in one of the books that I'm writing about this.
Wow.
So there are ancient references to Hindusthanam. So
Oh.
Hindu is actually a fairly ancient term, and also the Sapta Sindhu is really what ancient India is often referred to. Sapta Sindhu area as the place of the Vedic people, and so on and so forth. So historically, Hindu has been a term which really refers to the inhabitants of India.
Mhm.
That's really what the term means. And practically speaking, that is the meaning of it carried through. Even if you read the Guru Granth Sahib, or you start looking at some of the early Sikh literature, it's like Hindu versus Turki. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's the Turks versus the Hindus.
Mhm.
So it's kind of started to get used in a semi-religious format. And Dasham Granth, Guru Gobind Singh is talking about Hindu Rajya, to establish the Rajya of Hindus,
Mhm.
um, versus the Turks. So the Turks are seen as because they come in, and this is where this question of religion even starts in that way, because if we read Balagangadhar's work, S.N. Balagangadhar, for instance, there is no religion per se in India. Religion is an imposition. It's an idea that's imposed on us. We actually don't even still understand it. We don't understand what religion is. But these people are identifying as Hindus, which is mostly people who are Indians, people who live in India. And then these Turkeys come as invaders.
Mhm.
Um, and then there is this whole discourse of the Turks and the Hindus, which ends up being later into the Muslims and the Hindus, and then Hindus later on takes more of a
Religious.
religious connotation. But we have to remember that even that religious connotation is in some senses a form of colonialism or a form of response to somebody who's coming from outside and is asking that question, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
which is like, we are X religion. What is your
What
religion?
is your religion?
you know,
What is your book?
yeah. What is your book?
Who
What
is
is
your
your
prophet?
religion?
Who is your one main person? I used to get this question asked a lot.
Yes, yes, yes. Who's your founder? What is your
Who's your,
book?
yes, yeah.
Right. So, and what is your belief? let's
Yes,
let's
what do you believe
get
in?
more subtle. What do Hindus believe?
What do you believe?
Like, right. So my answer to that is, we believe all kinds of things. Why do we need to believe anything? So again, that question itself is being framed
Mm-hmm.
from the religious template that is coming from
Mm-hmm.
Abrahamic religion,
Mm-hmm.
whereas you have to have a book, which was brought by a prophet, and then you believe in the book, and that's what makes you an adherent of a religion. And so therefore the belief system is which um, separates you from
Mm-hmm.
one from the other. But again, all of this is like, we never really quite comprehend it. We are keeping on trying to um, interact with that, but or respond to it, but it never really quite made sense to us. Hmm.
Yeah, so true. So, what is Hinduism?
I gave a talk on this once, and I would say, you're going again. There's two parts to it. If you look at the history of the term Hinduism, that's about maybe 200 years old. Um, but if you look at what is this tradition about, right? Um, I would say it's a human tradition which is asking and answering some very fundamental questions that are common to all human beings. What are the questions? Questions are, how can I be happy? Right?
Mm-hmm.
This is why Shri did the happiness workshop, happiness program. What do human beings ask? They say, how can I be happy? And then you say, okay, I had some pleasure, but I found that only lasted for a short time. And then I start asking, okay, how can I be happy for a long time?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the notion of shreyas and prayas comes in.
Mm-hmm.
um, Things that make us happy for a short time versus those that will keep us happy for a long time. So this is one of the central questions. So if as a human being you're asking that question, how can I be happy, then the Hindu tradition sheds light on this, gives us a path, gives us some understanding of how do I be happy, what is this progression. And the very related question is, how can I be free?
Mm-hmm.
Because I find that because I'm constrained, I'm not able to be happy, because I have all these constraints on my mind. Actually, the concepts themselves are are being a prison for me. This really interesting incident happened one time. I was on Twitter, and this Christian evangelist who was an Indian, who came to me and said, oh, you should accept Jesus, and you'll be enlightened. You'll accept Jesus. Moksha. You'll get not enlightened. He says you'll get moksha.
Mm-hmm.
Just accept Jesus, and you get moksha. And I said, have you gotten moksha? And he said, yes. I said, good. Then you can throw away your Bible, because if you've gotten moksha, you don't need the book anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but he ran away because they don't even understand what it means to have moksha. If you're really free, then you don't need dogma, you don't need doctrine, you don't need to be bound by the concepts of the book,
Yes.
right? You are at that point, you are really free of all of that.
Yet,
But
yet at the same time, our traditions have that space also for those who want that structure,
mhm.
um, and also provide that freedom for people who may not be aligned with our, uh, so to say, architecture, open architecture, to still exist. And as long as you do your thing, we are okay.
Well, I mean, there's no that question of whether to let others exist or not is not even a question for us. I mean, it's obvious because that question only comes when you have a belief system that says God gave a revelation, a specific revelation to a specific people,
Mhm.
right? And therefore, only those who believe in that revelation are good, and those who don't believe either have to be made to believe or they need to be killed because they're evil in some ways or they're going to hell, right? Only in that context does the question come: should we allow them to exist or not,
Mhm.
right? But from the context of the indigenous tradition, it's a ridiculous question. Everybody has their own way. What is my business in stopping somebody else's way? I mean, everybody has their own path to happiness. If we come back
Mhm.
to the first question,
Mhm.
you know, you're happy watching movies, I'm happy playing golf. What is the conflict,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. So I've although heard some people critique, saying that, all this new agey stuff, all these things that are happening, this is this is Hinduism trying to come and overtake us.
Who's saying that Hinduism is trying to overtake us?
Some of the people who are like, people who believe in Christianity, people who believe in
Sure,
Judaism.
sure, sure. So I mean, it's natural for somebody who's in a closed system to feel threatened because they have invested a lot of energy. I'll give you an example. I had a friend whose parents went through this experience of a workshop of meditation in the Indian tradition, and the parents had been raised in a very fundamentalist Christian sect, but the woman had become very much interested in these, in the Indian traditions, Hindu traditions, and when her parents were very deeply moved by the experience, and they were very happy, but they told her that if I trust my experience here, then everything that I've been taught since I was a child is false. So it's not the tradition, it's their own experience, because one of the authority based structure of the belief system, religion, says that the word is above your experience. This is the word of God. God has told this is the commandment of God. Your experience has nothing to do, has no validity in front of that, right? So this is really where the conflict occurs, and it has occurred many times. So coming back to it, I would say, from the what is Hinduism is the question you asked, and I have a whole talk on this as well, but I would say it is the India was very fortunate in that it had a lot of these questions only happen when there is surplus, when there's a lot of scarcity, there's a lot of need, then people are just struggling to survive,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But because India had become a land which was very wealthy, and its people were well cared for, they could research and investigate and
They
pardon
had
me?
the luxury. They had the
Had the luxury,
luxury.
really. They had the luxury to do deep investigations into the nature of the human mind, into the nature of society, in the nature of consciousness. And through these researches and investigations, they came up with paths, with techniques, with processes that would help us be happy, help us be free,
Mhm.
right? So if anybody is interested in these questions, then they can see if that wisdom helps them, and if it doesn't help them, so be it. you
Mhm.
know
Yes.
it's not it's almost the opposite of conversion in the in the Abrahamic or in the Christian Islamic tradition, right? Because God has this commandment, we are going to come and convert you because you're going, and they're doing it out of their compassion because you're going to hell. We are just trying to save you, right?
Mhm, mhm.
But from our point of view, this is a path to happiness. If you want to be happy, you can come learn. If you don't want to learn, you can stay miserable. It's okay. Like we don't have to. We don't have to drag the horse to the water. When they're thirsty, it will come by itself,
Yes,
right? So you go through your life experience. At some point, you'll say, "Well, this isn't working for me. I need to go deeper." And
yes,
then you go into the tradition and see what it can bring to you.
yes. And you don't necessarily also have to put a label on yourself that I am this or I am that, right? Like there isn't a requirement for you to say that I am XYZ.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly.
yeah.
So just doing a little time check. If people have
Yeah,
questions,
certainly.
feel free to do question. Put these
Yeah.
in the chat either in Facebook or YouTube. I
Yes.
don't see very many questions so far, so we can continue
Yeah.
the conversation. But
So,
yeah,
Krat, a lot has happened in the area of South Asian studies with regards to Hinduism, right?
right,
Even after pointing out the misrepresentation of
sure,
the underlying power play and hegemony, it seems things haven't gotten better. At least to me, it seems.
sure, sure.
Rather, it seems they have gotten worse.
Hmm.
Um, so, what is it that we can do? What efforts, what are the efforts that we can do to sort of set the discourse on the right track and
Right.
to get more traction in US academia?
Well, I don't know if U.S. academia necessarily is the place where we would really get traction. But I think the path really is to open conversations and often personal conversations. And when I was telling you the story of Encarta, it was interesting that the editor of Encarta, I think her name was Karen, after I had worked on this new version of the article, Arvind Sharma, Professor Arvind Sharma had written it, and I was kind of making it more accessible and easier language for the children. Um, and after a while we had worked on it, she says, "You know what, Sankrant, I think I'm a Hindu." Um, and I was like, "Oh, how did this come about?" This was after she was reading the article and then she told the story that her dad was actually in the Manhattan Project with Oppenheimer, and the
Mm.
only book that he gave her was actually a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and
Mm.
this was the one he used to talk about all the time, right? So again, it's like, remember that schizophrenia we talked about in American society. There is this deep hunger, there is this deep interest in the real tradition. At the same time, there is this whole impetus,
Mhm.
which is coming from really imperialism, colonialism, and South Asianism is a great example of that. It's a Cold War term. They fabricated it. It has, if you look at, I have an article actually on this whole South Asianism for
Mhm.
phenomenon on Medium. You can search for my name in South Asian. And one of the things is that they fabricated this term because they because they had to, it was two confluence of two things. There was this adhikari thesis, and Sanjay Dikshit talks about it in his book Unbreaking India, which was a thesis of the Indian left. And this thesis of the Indian left was that there is no such thing as India, it constitutes just of sub-nationalities, which was also the British thesis, that there was no India, only the British created India. And so that same thesis finds its way into South Asianism, which is saying there is no India, it's not an entity, there's just South Asia, which is a collection of these different things, and it can be reconfigured at will. Never mind, millions of people died in the first reconfiguration that the colonial powers did with the help of the same kind of thinking
Mhm.
that led to the first partition. So that thinking has wreaked havoc on people. It has led to millions and millions of people dying. And
Mhm.
the same thing, when a lot of people have been asking me to talk about this dismantling global Hindutva conference, it's the same kind of thinking of stereotypes and genocide that has led to already many, many, many killings. And it's strange at a time when US academia is becoming sensitive to Black Lives Matter, it's getting sensitive to how it has misrepresented colored people, and the histories. It is hosting a conference which really is a blowback to 19th century racism and imperialism. But of course, it uses brown, people, and the Indian left becomes very useful idiots and sepoys in this effort to attack um, the Hindu traditions, and they use this term Hindutva
Mhm.
as if it is different. But as soon as you scratch the surface, you see that the target is actually Hindus. It's just a fig leaf. And Hindutva is a term that comes up in the 1990s, really, and
Mhm.
it's a term that is really a creation of academia.
Mhm.
People talk about, okay, Hindutva, Savarkar did it, and then of course, in this article, Hindutva is Hinduism that resists. It's actually not, I mentioned it's not Savarkar, but Chandranath Basu, who wrote this book, Hindutva, an authentic history of Hindus.
Mhm.
If you do the Engram search in Google, you see there's actually, in fact, even a Hindutva journal that has been published in English for many time, and it's really talking about Hinduism. So
Mhm.
Hindutva, and that's just Hinduness, is talking about Hindu tradition. The journal is called Hindutva. So in the 1990s, Hindutva is created as a polemical term.
Mhm.
It's created as a term that is used to attack Hindus, basically.
Mhm.
And so first they manufacture this term, then
Mhm.
they label certain people with that term. It's a smear term.
Mhm.
It's a very crazy episode. I think I was in the University of Washington. There was a lecture by Professor Paul Brass, who's part of this. I think he might have retired now.
Mhm.
And I went up and I had read Ashutosh Varshney's book, which was from a secular point of view, was had a semblance of being a little bit balanced. Of course, it was still quite a bit off.
Mhm.
But I mentioned that book to Paul Brass, and he was like, "No, no, no! Don't you know he's a Hindutva man?"
Mhm.
So this is like the smear campaign that happens even within academia. It's like the way you smear somebody, and you make sure that you discredit their work, you shut them down. So Hindutva is a smear term that is created in academia to shut any dissent down. That's basically what the role of this term is at this moment.
Yeah, it's quite disturbing actually. One would think, like as you talked about that schizophrenia, uh,
Mm,
one would think that at least one would see a few conferences here and there about positive contributions of Hinduism,
right,
you
right.
know, to the US and globally. But instead, we get to see a conference such as this, and it's terrible because it's interesting, Sankrant. We Hindus are an indigenous people,
Hmm.
and our story and our struggle is an indigenous struggle.
Yes.
Yet that is not made obvious, or it is actually we are gaslit, and
Yes.
that whole thing is just our persecution, our genocide is completely denied,
Yes.
while at the same time, as you said, those same people are talking about Black Lives Matter, are talking about feminism in the Middle East, are talking about the Native Americans and their struggle. But somehow when it comes to Hinduism, this just is not evident, or is glossed over, or we are gaslit. So this is a big struggle that we face.
Yeah, I think it's kind of. I also found it really bizarre. I mean, for the longest time, I have identified myself, with the left, and I was a liberal in many ways. I still am a liberal. If I take liberal as the older meaning of the term, which was somebody who's open-minded and who's plural and who's willing to look at a lot of different viewpoints.
Mhm.
But you have sort of the this new emerging left, neo left, which is really about shutting down voices without the cancel culture, and so much of that, which is really not about having a dialogue at all. But even within that, it's really interesting that Hindus are not even uh, granted a seat at the table.
Mhm.
There is no representation. There is nobody who can actually. You can only go there and abuse Hindutva. You
Mhm.
can't even go into the academic conference and say, "But excuse me, like I want to speak as a Hindu, and
Mhm.
this is my point of view." Because
Mhm.
as soon as you speak as a Hindu, that smear of Hindutva is going to be labeled on you.
Mhm.
And this is one of the things I talk about: good Hindu versus bad Hindu in that article, Dead Peoples Tell No Tales, which is, as soon as you say, well, my tradition is being distorted, as soon as you say this is not quite the way it is, I disagree with this, from because this is not my experience, you are going to be labeled Hindutva,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
in the academic thing, they're going to say define it as Hindutva is equal to BJP, RSS, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Mm-hmm.
if that is really true, then what does global Hindutva mean? I mean, BJP is not a party that's outside
Exactly.
India, right? I mean, it's a
Exactly.
nonsensical term. The
Yes.
only meaning for firstly saying global Hindutva is to say that all Hindus are a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the second of it is when you say dismantling it, you've already, it's not an academic conference any longer, it's an
Exactly.
activist conference, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you're saying academia has a point of view which has already dubbed something as evil,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's the job the academics have taken upon themselves, a job to dismantle this. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if this isn't close to fascism, if this isn't close to
Racism.
extermination, it's very difficult to figure out what is, but they don't see it, they don't there's no self-reflection there.
Yeah, and I wonder if it is just more about how much it is about self-reflection and how much it is intentional.
Mm.
In terms of it's it can be one thing to not be self-aware and not be conscious of what's happening through you, but
Yes, yes.
uh, in some cases it almost seems intentional. That this is a particular smear campaign that is being run.
Yes, yes. I mean, there are of course lots and lots of billions of dollars at play as well. I mean, because of the fact that there is no such religion thing as Hindus. There is no imperative for us to propagate or to, in Christianity there's actually branches of theology, which are polemics is a branch of theology, apologetics is a branch of theology, right? So you're systematically taught how to attack other people's religions. You're systematically taught how to defend your own. I mean, this is part of what you do in seminary, right?
And the flip side of that is
Yes.
in dharma, in dharmika traditions, it's none of your business
Yeah.
what the other person is. So the question even doesn't arise to talk about or discuss. It's taboo, in fact.
Yes. Yes.
People feel bad about, what do I know about what you believe in? So
Exactly. And
yeah.
it's, yeah, it is not my business. You have your path, I have mine. There is no conflict. It's like there is this other article I'd written about freedom, religious freedom, conversion war and religious freedom, in
Mhm.
which I talk about the fact that, for the one side, this converting the other is a religious imperative, they have to do it. For the other side, it's almost meaningless, like like you, it's as ridiculous to convert somebody else as it is to say switch your ancestors for my own, you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
because it's like you have your ancestors, I have my ancestors, you have your path, I have my path. There is really no imperative. So the result of that, though, is that because there is no congregational evangelism of that form which is present in both Christianity and Islam, and of course there's billions and billions of dollars of funding that goes into both of that. So that funding combined with, I know, for instance, Soros had announced at one point that he's going to spend a lot of money countering Modi in India, stuff like that, which is fine. I mean, you can agree with Modi, you can disagree with Modi, you can criticize Modi, you cannot criticize Modi. You're totally fine to do that as people of India. They can elect him, they can reject him. That's their business, right? But when you are doing an intervention like that,
Mhm.
then that's clearly a form of imperialism,
Yes.
right? It's a democracy. He was elected in the largest democratic exercise in history, and if the people don't like him, they're going to throw him out, and they're free to do so. Let them do so, right? So this whole uh, sort of white man's burden and this whole notion that we have to fix this other country and we have to,
Make
we
them
have to,
like us. We have to
yeah,
make them
exactly, because we are going to now, if the democratic outcome doesn't bring up somebody we like,
Mhm.
then we are going to undermine that democracy itself. um, and that's really part of what's going on, and which is really, it's very unfortunate. I mean, the fact that, for me, it was really distressing, because as I said, I always counted myself, as a liberal, as mainly on the left. I've mostly voted. I don't think, I've never ever voted a Republican, and in my history in the U.S. So,
Me neither.
but I see people that I considered would be allies. If you were to use a contemporary term,
Yeah.
but really being the aggressors. The allies, rather than being allies, have turned into aggressors, and they are part of the problem. And this is something that the American left, to the extent it really still believes in multiculturalism and rights of indigenous people and of minorities and so on and so forth, that they talk about, should look at. They are attacking, in their terminology, a minority people of color in the US, and thinking that they're doing some great thing.
In fact, I would go so far as to say we are one of the most traumatized people
Yes,
for the
yes,
longest time. And, so to take our trauma and to deny that, it's
right.
just, it's, it's just the worst karma you can do, in so many ways.
Absolutely, absolutely,
So,
and this is, as I said, it's very unfortunate. And I mean, you see the kind of people that are coming into the conference. I mean, you have people who are literally, I mean, the most people don't know this, and certainly Americans don't, that the most violent groups in India are actually from the left. The
mhm.
All of the top terror orgs from India are leftist groups, the Maoists and the Naxalites, and the so-called Hindutva, if you ascribe it to these parties, BJP, RSS, is not even a fraction of what the left has been doing. So, I mean, these are public figures. It's not something I'm making up. It's not ideological. It's just the data is that the killings from the and those are the kinds of people. You have somebody like Cumming, who's a party member of CPI-ML, which is this Marxist Leninist party,
Yeah,
which is aligned with these very violent left groups,
yeah.
and they are coming here, and they are being staged in a
In these,
conference.
in
So
these big Ivy League universities.
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Of course, I mean, the Ivy League thing might be, again, it's
Yeah.
it's kind of misused, because I doubt the university or anybody signed up, but you can always get some random person in some South Asian department to,
Correct.
which is this ghetto anyway, that nobody in the university even cares about, right?
Yeah.
And they go and they sign up and say, okay, I'm coming to the conference, and they put the university name, saying this university is sponsoring it, which is nothing like that, actually.
Which doesn't, it's not really the university that's
Yeah,
sponsoring it. University has freedom of expression
right,
for its academics, so
right.
they are taking that as an opportunity to smear.
Yeah, but what these so-called South Asian scholars have to look at is that if it was any other group that was being targeted like this, academia itself would revolt and would be aghast at this,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you try to do a conference against global Jewishness, do a conference against global Islam,
Mhm.
right? Dismantling global Islam, do a conference and
Yep.
see how many people in academia would be absolutely appalled at that,
All that.
right? But you can do the same conferencing opposing global Hindutva,
Yeah.
and there is no.
Right. And the interesting part is the title says global Hindutva, but when you look at the description and you
Right.
look at all of the, the topics and the speakers, they are just rabid anti-Hindu folks, and the topics themselves are not are directed directly towards dismantling Hinduism.
Yes, yes, of course.
So
Yeah,
yeah, so the title may say one thing or may want to mean one thing, but when you look at what they're actually doing, it's actually dismantling Hinduism. So
yeah,
it's
yeah. I mean, it's just a
yeah,
proxy. As I said,
yeah,
the way that they use Hindutva, it's just a smear word that they have for any for Hinduism on the one side, and anybody who really
yeah,
speaks up,
yeah.
and says no, there is a problem here, they would be smeared by it.
So Sankrant, before we end, I just have a very important point that I just wanted to bring to your attention, and I wanted your opinion on this. So there, I shared the Global Hindutva petition or whatever that was going around on WhatsApp and on Facebook, and one very smart, brilliant young Indian boy who's studying in one of these universities, he wrote back to me saying, "Well, Vandana auntie, we don't see eye to eye, and I'm sorry, I cannot support you on this." So how do we reach our youth? How, because a lot of our youth, especially who are part of these South Asian study programs, who are part of this academic parampara, they've almost been, I would say, indoctrinated or brainwashed, and it's very hard to reach them.
Well, I think the question we would ask is that I would ask them to question how they are being used, and ask them to say, okay, what other indigenous tradition would be targeted like that and would be acceptable, right? And they have to start asking the right questions, because they are definitely being employed as, just like in the British employed a sepoy of so a lot of Indians in their army to fire on other Indians. There's definitely a huge number that are employed, and there's a lot of confusion that's created, and sometimes Hindutva is equated to BJP and RSS, sometimes it's equated to Hinduism, sometimes to all Hindus, sometimes to the caste system. It's so you just like you just throw it around, and you create enough
Wherever
confusion.
it sticks.
Yeah, wherever it sticks. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So somebody wants to criticize the BJP, sure, criticize the BJP, call them the BJP and criticize them.
Yeah.
Oh, why do you have to use this term Hindutva? I
Yeah.
mean, it's a term, as I said, the academia has really created in many ways. It was not really a term. It wasn't even in vogue till the 1990s. It's brought up, and then it's used in this manner.
So I think another issue that I see with our youth is that they see that Hindus are a well-to-do community in
Hmm.
the US. That whole model minority myth thing. So they think that, oh well, we are well-to-do, so we potentially can then be oppressors, as opposed to having. Then how are we the people who have struggled? If we were really the people who would struggle, then how come we are doing so well? So
Well, I think there are some Indians who are definitely well-to-do, but individual success and success as a community, as an identity, is not the same thing. You know, I can be very successful software engineer at Microsoft as long as I don't speak up and say I'm a Hindu. You know, as long as I don't. So they should really step out. Step out and see what kind of response happens as soon as they own their identity in the public life.
very
and
well.
and in fact, Tulsi Gabbard was a great example. I had a conversation with her. In fact, she also tweeted about it, that somebody, Tulsi Gabbard, who's born in America, comes from Samoan and other heritage. Her parents had adopted the Hindu traditions. She has definitely been targeted for it. So yeah, you can claim you're successful, but you're only successful as an individual. And as soon as you speak up for your tradition, it doesn't matter how plural or liberal you are, you're going to get targeted. So are you going to, you can go and hide, or you can go and speak up.
Well, on that note, I think I am. I learned a lot, Sankrant, today from you, and a lot of stuff for me to think about and digest. And for me, how to talk to the youth. I think that is our biggest thing, that we need to be able to bring our youth this awareness about our culture and about our struggle and all of that. So
Absolutely, yeah, about that as well. And also, I think for Indian parents, it's very important that we have the relevance of the tradition show up in life. Um, and this is certainly for my children, they went through their own journey, and this is why something like Art of Living is so wonderful, because you go through the experience and then you see how this helps me. It helps me in my life, it helps me in my stress, it helps me in my college, it helps me. I mean, the Yale Happiness Workshop is one of their most successful courses. That was just doing a course on happiness, and now of course a lot of the so those are the central questions. As I said, we don't have to make it very complicated. The tradition is really a guide and this asset for all of us. It is
all of
our,
humanity, for all of
yeah,
humanity.
for all of humanity, exactly.
Mhm.
So the people who attack it in some senses are depriving humanity of the benefits and gifts that it brings.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful, Sankranti.
Thank you so much.
So wonderful to have had this conversation.
Namaskar and Jai Gurudev. Yeah.
Jai Gurudev.